Bonjour, mes amis, and welcome to this evening's webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about how the season and how the light might be impacting not only how you're feeling, but how your body is functioning. So, when we talk about winter days, when we talk about dark days, most people will most often think about feeling, and they may even associate it to something called SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder. But what often gets missed in this conversation is how deeply light is wired into our biology, and through that wiring, how it impacts more within our body. So, light doesn't just affect mood, it is a master signal that talks to our brain, to our hormones, even to our blood vessels. It talks to our body. So, when light drops and our internal clock shifts, melatonin is going to be stretching later into the morning. Cortisol, that blip that we expect in the morning and then early afternoon, that timing is going to drift a little bit. And we also see that serotonin signaling is going to change. And we know how much serotonin impacts gut, mind, focus. So, this combination doesn't only make us feel tired and a little bit cranky, it's going to be impacting our appetite, it's going to be impacting our stress response, it's going to be impacting my patients with Nepeta here, and it's going to be impacting energy production at a cellular level. So, over the weeks and months that you may be seeing less and less light as the season, as the winter carries on, these shifts are going to ripple into impact that influences blood pressure, blood sugar, inflammation, and immune resilience. So, tonight we're going to be talking beyond mood. We're going to be talking about other elements that the light is going to be impacting, how these dark winter days are reshaping our neurochemistry, neurochemical landscape and our cardiometabolic health, and what our genes have to say about that. In particular, things that maybe your body is going to be more vulnerable to than another body might be more vulnerable to. So today the goal is again to talk about as this light drifts, as the season continues, what should we be aware of and how can we fix it? Joining me for this conversation this evening is our ever beloved Justin Harris. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Dr. K, and good evening, everybody. I like this topic. We're in February now. Dr. K and I both live in
Yeah.
Canada, so we're definitely pretty deep into it. And
Mm.
it's pretty interesting because life kind of has seasons. It's like I talk about in my coaching with people that there's these expansion phases and contraction phases. And just like how we breathe in and out, there are times during the year when we expand and we feel good and we build momentum and create relationships, etc. But these seasons depend on each other. So the expansion phase only exists in juxtaposition to these contraction phases. And to me, winter generally represents a contraction phase. Like for me personally, my energy is always a bit more somber. The plants, the
Mm.
animals, everything kind of turns
Mm.
inward for a
Yeah.
period, right? And I really think too that physiologically and just the mental taxation that different people experience during these contraction phases can vary quite a bit, right? And
Hmm.
a lot of genetic considerations as well with that influence it. So just
Hmm.
like everything, we need to hack our epigenetic environment to support these
Yeah.
areas until the next expansion phase comes about. So that's what we're going to
Yeah.
talk about tonight.
Yeah, and I'm watching the chat and I'm seeing within the chat there's been a few people that are saying like, "Oh, it depends on where you live," and some people are happy that you and I are connects up in Canada and can really empathize with the lack of light. So, audience, please toss into the chat where you're calling in from or where you're viewing in from, I guess. I see that someone's in San Diego and moved there specifically because of light issues. I'm seeing that there's someone else, Jazz, I think I'm saying that right, who's in Toronto with me, and I'm seeing quite a few. We have some Edmonton, which I venture is going to be dark. Washington State on the dark-ish side. Oh, and then we have some glorious people in South Carolina and Australia and Texas and Orange County and places where there will be a little bit of light shifting, right? But not necessarily the dramatic shifting that Justin or I are seeing, or people that are north of us. Oh, wow. Yeah, wet UK. I think the only person I've seen in the Southern Hemisphere is Australia. So there will be a few people that this information is going to be very relevant to in about 6 months.
Yeah, and it's always important to
Yeah.
note too that it's kind of this effect still takes place. It's just relative to what your biology is used to. Like, even if you
Hmm.
live in a sunnier place, but it still has kind of a gradual shift later on in
Hmm.
the year, it's still going to impact you. It's still going to have that little bit of difference in how your hormones and things react. So, even though it's a tad more extreme when you're north of the border, I think it's still a relevant conversation because there is still
Yeah.
contraction and expansion phases that everyone's going to face in life. So.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, Justin, why don't you kick us off? So, audience, we always ask poll questions because we want to know why you're here and what you care to learn about. And so, Justin's going to go through some of those poll questions.
Absolutely. If our angels in the back wouldn't mind pulling that up, let's dive on in. Technopoly may be not working
Betty,
right
can you
for us
pull that up for
tonight.
us? If not, we can guess at things. All right. Perhaps perhaps if the tech powers that be aren't working, we can come back to that a little bit later. Oh, there
There
we
it is.
go.
Lovely. Thank you. Okay, so we asked you guys a handful of questions here just to kind of get an idea of why you're here and what you can gain from the webinar tonight. The first one was pretty simple. It's just how do you usually feel during the winter months? I mentioned that I tend to feel that little bit of somberness and less energy and things like that. And it looks like I'm not alone. So 39% of the audience says that they get that low energy, in that phase of the year, low mood. That's another 36%. Only 5% say sleepy all the time. And that's good to know that you guys are still awake and alert for tonight's webinar, just like Dr. K and I are. And 20% of you say no major change. So people in your life may still experience these changes. I mean, I think that you're still going to come away from tonight with some actionable advice that you can give to those in your life that may struggle with these things. And with that being said, the second question is, what do you struggle with most in the winter? And a whopping 64% of the audience say motivation, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, dopamine and different neurotransmitters and modulators that get affected in the winter months. So motivation is a big one. Mood changes. 16% of you said you have changes in your mood. 4% of you say that you have sleep problems in the wintertime because of the difference in the light stimulus that's always coming in. And 16% of you have weight or appetite changes because, believe it or not, the differences in these rhythms can impact hunger hormones, satiety signals, etc. So all of these things are of relevance tonight. Then we asked you, how much daylight exposure do you get in the wintertime? And 39% said very little. Yeah, because it's not there, totally common. 21% said some weekdays only, so still not a consistent pattern. 13% of you are getting out there in the weekends, and that's good. And then 27% said just regular outdoor exposure. So that's fantastic. That's one of my main pieces of advice for people who have more of a preclinical, SAD. Get outside, right? Going outside is still very valuable. There's negative ions out there. There's fresh air out there. We still want to make sure that we're doing that. But I get it. In the wintertime, we're a lot less, inspired to do so. The fourth question is, do you feel more tired even when you sleep enough in the winter? So you're getting adequate sleep, but you're still just low and you're not motivated, energized. And 59% of you said sometimes, 30% said always, 9% said rarely, and a very lucky 2% said never. So congratulations to y'all. I wish I was in that particular boat with you. The last question that we asked is, do you think the genetics influence seasonal mood changes? And most of you said yes. 36% of you said probably. 23% said not sure. And exactly zero said no. So you're all in the right spot because we're going to be talking about genes in relevance for this conversation.
Yeah. And I'm yeah, I think listening to what the audience cares about, I think there's a lot of clinical pearls for us to go through, in particular, given how genes can shift where we might most be feeling it. I think it was interesting that there was a lot of differences between how people were feeling the same lack of light, right? It wasn't just mood, there was feelings of energy, there was feelings around food, right? There's a lot of different things, and it's amazing how one thing can influence all of that. And so listen through to understand where your genetics say this is your weak point, and here are tips and tricks that can help influence that. A lot of which I think, Justin, to your point, is going to be light and getting outside. even though it's frigid. Someone is saying that is in Florida, South Florida, somewhere honestly that I would have expected it to be very warm within the winter. They're saying in the morning it can be in the 30s, which I imagine that's Fahrenheit, which is from a Canadian perspective almost freezing, close to that freezing point, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, I think it's around 0 Celsius. We'll do our best tonight if there's a lot of Fahrenheiters in the audience, which there appears to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, light really is epigenetic information.
Hmm.
That's how we talk about everything. We talk about food as epigenetics, movement, thoughts, everything is epigenetics. And light absolutely is. There's these receptors for light in all of your mitochondria. So it enters the body and it really influences how your cells behave in different ways. Where I'm at right now, like the days are slowly getting longer, but at its worst, it's like it doesn't even get light until after 8 in the morning. And then it's dark by 4 p.m. And most of us, because we work, you got to get up at whatever, 6 or something like that. So when the first couple hours that you're awake, you don't have the natural light, you have to go ahead and turn on artificial lights. And that can start to mess with your energy, your mood, different things. The cortisol
Mm.
rhythmicity can be changed based on the type of light that you give it. So we'll get into some of that tonight too, how to hack
Hmm.
the lighting environment to make sure that you still got
Yeah.
energy when you need it and that you can shut it down and rest when appropriate as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So, Justin, why don't we start off, I guess, set the stage a little bit, and let's talk about the biology of I guess, what is influenced exactly by light? How can light shift so many different things for so many different people?
Yeah, there's a really important rhythm that goes on in the body that light is one of the main governors of, being the cortisol and melatonin pattern, right, in the body. When you have blue light exposed, and even if it's going through your eyelids, your body still knows it's blue light. And that's really only going to happen in the mornings typically. So that's actually something that kicks off the cortisol rhythm, right? And cortisol causes your liver to release blood glucose. So you get that sugar buzz and that's what gets you up in the morning. If cortisol remains elevated in the PM, it suppresses your melatonin, right? So light has a significant role here in when we're supposed to wake up and when we're supposed to go to bed. That's why I've always been such a big fan of doing that horizon gazing tactic, right? If you can just look towards the horizon, even if it's clouded over, but do it in the AM and then do it again in the PM, your brain will recognize the angle of the sun. It's like a low solar angle. But in the morning, it's like a blue yellow spectrum. And then in the evening, it's more of a red, a little bit of yellow still left in there. But it tells your brain this is AM and this is PM, right? And it's all about regulating the cortisol and the melatonin factors as well as serotonin. And we talk a lot about serotonin in the genetics. I don't know if you want to dive into that, Dr. K.
Yeah, yeah. So, audience, to ground you, what Justin said is when we see light, it triggers a lot of melatonin. And in particular, over time, if there's longer exposure, more dysregulated exposure to this melatonin, it will shift serotonin. And one of the ways that it can shift serotonin in particular is receptors that govern how long we have access to our serotonin. So think about serotonin. It has two jobs principally. One of its jobs is essentially to give our nervous system and the way we feel a big hug. It's a big comforting element within our brain. So while I think in the 70s and 80s it was often pictured as this thing that makes us happy, what we now know more as something that gives us comfort. And so in the winter, as we're exposed to longer melatonin, as we're exposed to, a little bit of offset between that melatonin and cortisol spiking, we know that there's going to be a greater increase of serotonin transporter presentation, which is actually going to gobble up our melatonin a little bit quicker. So, what are the consequences of that? Number one, we're not feeling that sense, that nervous system hug. Number two, the other thing that melatonin really influences is focus. It influences, if you have a list of tasks, are you able to focus on that? Or is your attention going to be scattered across all those tasks? So, people who talk about, I may not feel well, or in a different way, I may not be able to focus as well. This is a direct result of that shift in serotonin And from a genetic perspective, right, what can cue you into you may be a little bit more vulnerable or subject to this is going to be, do you have different serotonin genes that influence you to either poor production, like in the case of TPH2, more aggressive, less effective recycling, as in the case of 5-HTT-LPR. Or for those that are getting the new panel, we also have two new genes that sit on the HRT 1A and 1 or 2A, sorry, genes. And this really looks at serotonin receptors and how we receive serotonin. Are we feeling it, or are we cutting off that experience really quickly? So, one thing I'd really encourage you to cue in from a focus perspective, from a mood perspective, is jumping into serotonin, looking at your genes there, all of which are going to be in your mood and behavior. You can look at your system summary if you want to quick gaze into that. And that will influence a lot of how you're feeling, but then also some of the focus that you have.
Yeah, and that 5-HTT-LPR gene is really interesting. So the way that we kind of look at that, it's a polymorphism. So it's not going to have the little snip letters there. It's actually a longer or a shorter receptor, and that's what we're looking at. So if you look at your gene there, it's going to be in your executive function profile, the mood and behavior. It's going to have L's, or it's going to have S's, or it's going to have kind of a middle genotype being LS. And we're literally talking about longer if it's LL, shorter if it's SS, and the LS is still considered a little bit shorter or dysregulated. And serotonin is interesting because it's kind of a revolving door, right? So there's this release and then there's a reuptake, and it's meant to go around and around. If you've got the shorter receptor, though, it means that not only is the half life not going to be as long, right? So it's not going to stick around forever to give you those positive feelings, but there's less of a release in the first place. If you've also got a suboptimal TPH2 genotype, that's going to make it so that your brain still can't, like, it can't produce as much either in the first place. So that's how we kind of assess serotonin dysregulation. It's important to know that if you don't have good quality sleep, it's going to impact that further. If you don't have good quality gut health, it's going to impact that further as well. So serotonin is something that, the clinicians here will spend quite a bit of time on. We work on the sleep, we work on the gut, and we need to know what that receptorship looks like in the first place, because then there's tips and tricks and things that we can do with regard to the sleep environment. There's even dietary stuff, right, including more tryptophan sources. The carb backloading trick that I talk about a lot, where you kind of push your carbohydrates back to the evening meal, that can translate to a little bump in
Yeah.
serotonin, which will then translate to a little bit of bump in melatonin. And these are the ways that we kind of work through dysregulated profiles.
I think I like that you kind of brought up the impact of carbohydrate on serotonin. So, one thing that you see a lot in clinical reports describing seasonal affective disorder, or even people who aren't quite don't have SAD but are flirting with it, many of them will report like part of what I go through is I want to eat all the carb all the time. It's this very instinctual, I can't get away with it. It sits with me like breathing does. This craving of I want all the bread, all the croissant, all the potato. And part of that is because when you intake carb, that will encourage serotonin production. It's a little bit of a bodily response of I don't have enough of this byproduct of serotonin, namely I don't feel cozy and I don't have the focus. So what can I do to get that? And the body intuitively knows if I consume carbohydrate, that will encourage the production of serotonin and indirectly melatonin. So for those that are struggling with this, two things, like first of all, I'd also look at appetite and satiety, right? There are going to be some people that are even more pushed over that edge towards, if you don't have great genes that curate satiety, toss this on top. You're going to be all the more nom, 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 give me all the carbs, right? But additional to that, be mindful that if you have poor serotonin genes, that's going to influence what you're craving. And as Justin is saying, be proactive about that. Once you know that's your body's natural tendency, be aware of that and then be proactive about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like a lot of these different rhythms that we talk about are strongly related to gut health as well, right? So it's like the melatonin considerations are there with the clock gene and the cry gene. Those are two of the main ones that we look at for circadian rhythm, but they have to be talked about in context with serotonin because all of that comes into play with how your body governs this rhythm. We have the gene is literally called clock, right? But that's one of the primary regulators of circadian rhythm as well. I have a dysregulation myself in that gene, and it makes it a lot harder for the body to sort of like adapt and stick to the same rhythm. So when you're dysregulated there, it's important to remember that we have to honor these rhythms to the absolute best of your ability. And gut health is one of those primary things to look at because there's actually 400 times the amount of melatonin made in the GI tract than there is in the pineal gland. The pineal gland will sort of contribute in the PM, but most of that is happening in your gut. A lot of that serotonin as well, right? So we always talk about gut health in kind of a broad context because it is truly your second brain. And when we have these suboptimal genetic presentations, you've got to reinforce the main areas that matter: sleep, gut, the way you're eating, carbohydrate timing, all of these things will help to regulate that.
Mm. Yeah, and why don't we explore, Justin, a little bit more in terms of genes and how that can influence circadian rhythm? So you brought up clock and you brought up this idea of circadian rhythm. I wonder if you can explain to the audience what circadian rhythm is and why in the winter in particular people with suboptimal circadian rhythm, be that because of clock or other genes, we absolutely can talk about other genes, but why those in the winter with suboptimal genes there are going to be even more greater risk of dysregulation in the winter.
Yeah, and it's due to this diurnal thing that we all have, right? So like animals, a lot of them have a nocturnal presentation, and we are diurnal. So that means that we're supposed to be awake during the day and we're supposed to be asleep at night. And so of course there's genetics that regulate that whole mechanism when it comes to this cortisol, serotonin, melatonin rhythm that's supposed to go on. Ideally, we have like these 12-hour chunks, right? So it's like the cortisol rises in the AM. About 12 hours after that is when it should be at its absolute lowest, and it should be dropping throughout the day. It should be pretty easy for us to just have like a chronotype and to kind of align with a particular sleeping pattern. But dysregulated clock or dysregulated cry one means that you have a lot more trouble kind of establishing a rhythm and sticking to it. You may be the type of person who can stick to a rhythm for a couple of weeks, and then you have one bad night's sleep and all of a sudden the whole thing goes wayward, and now here you are sleeping until 11 a.m. and the whole thing has to be brought back once again. So again, these signals and the epigenetics that we have control over is what you need to do. I'm obsessed with these BioLights that I have. I just got them a couple months ago, and they're fantastic. We're not affiliated or anything, but in brief, I bought all these light bulbs. It's not a gadget; they're actual bulbs, and they have incandescent lighting, so they're not LEDs. It's got less EMF exposure and dirty electricity and things like that, but it's got the full spectrum, and it has three different settings. And I've been using them to manage this clock gene that I have that's suboptimal, right? So it's got a morning setting, and then an afternoon and an evening setting as well. And you just got to click the light switch and it turns one on, click it off, click it on, it goes to the next. And I've been really using that to kind of manage my epigenetic environment on top of the horizon gazing and things like that. Another thing that I'm a really big fan of for managing this rhythm would be to time your exercise properly as well to manage the stress hormones. So if you do a little bit of stressful movement in the morning, you're actually amplifying the cortisol. And then in the evening, if you were to do more restorative movement, that helps to kind of transition your body into that parasympathetic state as well. Right. So again, movement is epigenetics. If you do something on purpose to spike the cortisol just a bit in the morning, and then in the evening, everything is slow exhales and maybe do a sauna or something like that in the evening, that helps to sort of auto regulate it. And as someone who has a suboptimal clock gene and lives up north, those have been kind of my primary movers there. So that's how the clock and the cry gene all kind of influence this whole circadian rhythm, which is doubled down on in the wintertime.
Yeah. I like that you brought up there. There's a huge element of control over circadian rhythm. So for the audience's awareness, in the latest update of the DNA 360, we've included several genes that speak to chronotype, that speak to the body's natural tendencies. Are you a morning person compared to a late person? And I went down this really deep rabbit hole of, does chronotype actually exist? Because if you talk to the nerds out there, the nerds are kind of fighting about this. There's a camp of nerds that says, absolutely, it's dictated by genes. And then there's another camp of nerds that says, absolutely not. It's dictated by behavior. It's very much that nurture nature debate that persists through the millennia. And I think where most research is kind of starting to settle down is that there's probably 50%, maybe even 60% contribution from genes. Meaning, if you have certain genes that will absolutely have you to a tendency of morning or evening. But, and this is the more important part, and this is why I think listening to Justin becomes really important. Even if you have a chronotype, for example, that's an evening one or a morning one, but your life requires you to be the opposite, you can absolutely do that if you set up the structures that Justin has just articulated. And this is the most important part, you are consistent with them. I've seen a few people asking questions around shift work, around, especially in the winter when we don't have as much sunlight, shift work becomes all the more problematic. And while this won't be per se a helpful prompt for some of the shift workers, keep this in mind that number one, consistency is king. But number two, there's a lot of anchors that you can create in that consistent schedule that can bump you to wake ups or go to bed relative or against your different chronotype, right?
Yeah, and it's really important to know that if you do have shift work, the melatonin disruption, one of the biggest problems with it is that melatonin is also one of your body's primary antioxidants, right? And especially for the mitochondria. So if we end up with dysregulation there, that can have other impacts as well. And typically, when I have clients that are shift workers, I work on their detox and I work on just as many mitigating factors as possible because it is not the natural human rhythm to go every 2 weeks and completely swap your sleeping schedule almost to the perfect opposite in a lot of cases with shift work. So supporting your detox and supporting your restoration. Like I also work on this thing for those people with this biohacked nap thing, right? Where we'll use gadgetry and different things to kind of create a little space where they can do like 20 to 40 minutes of letting technology kind of pull them into a parasympathetic state. And I've seen a lot of good results doing that, like finding a little bit of time, maybe elevate your feet, do a brain tap or a new calm or something like that. Even a breath work session, just some sort of nervous system reset helps a lot. The brain tap is fascinating as well because that device, it has certain applications on there that are meant to kind of stimulate cortisol and dopamine and things like that. So I will use technology to also do that. Like I typically, when I wake up in the morning, like I said, I get up at 6. It doesn't get light till 8. So now I've got to tell my body in as many ways as I can that this is the AM and this is when we're going to get up because it mitigates the downsides. If you don't have enough cortisol, you're not going to have enough energy because that's what gives you that blood glucose. And it's an important anti-inflammatory as well. Cortisol is not the enemy, folks. So I'll do a session with this brain tap first thing when I wake up that's actually designed to stimulate cortisol and dopamine and get me going with these biolights on the morning setting. And it's just like as many inputs as I can give my body. Hey, dude, it's morning. It's time to get some energy.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that. I wonder if we can shift some of the conversation into vitamin D because this tends to be very ubiquitous with any conversation around light and any conversation around sad and any conversation around mood. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
For sure. It's one of our most important panels that we look at because it can really translate to dosing protocols and make sure that you're doing it right. 10,000 IU dosage for one person taken all at one time is going to be very different than taken by that same person spread out throughout the day. Some people have the genetic alignment where they can take these big doses of vitamin D, and most, if not all of it, can get through into the receptor site. But if you don't have the correct genes there, you can be wasting 8 out of 10,000 there because you may have receptorship problems with a gene called VDR, that's the vitamin D receptor, or you may have transport problems. There's a gene called GCVDBP that we look at. That's the vitamin D binding protein. I describe it as the Uber that takes activated vitamin D to the receptor site. And we're not getting a lot of that natural vitamin D right now because we're not getting a lot of that sunshine on the skin. But even if you were, some people have a suboptimal CYP2R1 gene, which means that you're not activating the vitamin D that you're getting, right? So we don't make active D3 when we get the sun on our skin. We make a precursor. We make D2. D2 is inactive, and it has to be converted to D3 in order to do its job. So when you're suboptimal there, even sun tanning can't necessarily get everything through to the receptors so that can really get its influence on the cells. When we're supplementing, though, that's rarely D2 that you're supplementing with. It's almost entirely D3. So now we just have to worry about the transport with that GC and the VDR with that receptorship. I've seen people taking doses too late in the day and they don't have good transport. And it's like, man, we can assume that it's like midnight by the time that this vitamin D just got through. And now you just told your body, again, with epigenetics, you told your body it's daytime or morning time. And I've seen people disrupt their circadian rhythm with improper vitamin D timing. So I'm a fan of doing it in the AM. It's the sunshine vitamin, right? And it's actually a hormone. So we want to send those signals to the body and give yourself a dose in the AM. If you don't have good transport or receptorship, you're going to need to break that up with smaller dosing protocols, but doing it a little spaced out. Maybe 2 or 3 time a day dosing with smaller IU percentages, and more of it will ultimately work its way through. And if you have like a cutoff there, like for me, it's like, 2, 3 p.m. I cut off and I don't take in any more. That gives it time to work its way through, get to the receptor. And now you've told your body it's daytime. We got a little sunshine and we're nice and healthy now.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I think once you take it, depending on how you digest and transport, usually it takes about 4 to 6 hours before your cells are actually going to see it and start that conversation of what do I do? So Justin's saying, if you're taking it later on in the day, 4, 5, 6 hours later, that's when your body's finally getting that signal. And that's typically when you're going to bed. I'd also really, really encourage the audience to make sure that you are working with your doctor to get blood work associated to your vitamin D3. And I say this both sides of the aisle. I think, if we look back even 5 years ago, most people were running really low. And blood work would have educated them to that and told them to, hey, you should probably start a supplement. Now, more or less, what I'm seeing is that people are overdosing and we're getting people who have too high dosing, which will definitely impact cardiac and will impact even in some people a feeling of anxiety because the heart is going to be compensating in a different way. So I would really encourage, as you're navigating seasonal mood and as you're navigating lack of light and you're trying to say, hey, what can I do to compensate? Make sure blood work and lab work is part of that because we don't want your solution for something to be something that also makes what you're trying to address even worse. And I have seen instances of that, audience. I know it's tempting to see vitamin D as just something over the counter because everyone pushes it. Make sure you're doing the blood work because I see quite a few people that are too high.
Yeah, and that's especially an important consideration if you have the 4 allele in the ApoE gene. I would definitely be aware of vitamin D3, especially in the absence of K2. I never recommend people take vitamin D3 without the K2, just because you run that risk, right? That calcification risk. At high doses, vitamin D3 can calcify in the arteries, and that's absolutely not something we want from a cardiovascular perspective, especially. And when you have that 4 allele in the the ApoE gene, that means that you're more likely to calcify cholesterol and cause that plaque buildup. So K2 happens to have kind of an anti-calcifying effect, and it can really help there. I would also point you towards your NOS3 gene here. This is not something that gets talked about a lot, but I think it's really fascinating. If you don't have enough nitric oxide, you can continue to pile in the vitamin D, but anything that gets internally stored there, right? Because vitamin D will be stored in the adipose tissue. it may not be released in the body so that your body can kind of use its own vitamin D storages. Nitric oxide comes along and releases it from that adipose tissue. So look at your NOS3 gene. If it is suboptimal, you may want to also add in some nitric oxide increasing stuff, right? So that would be like arginine, citrulline, agmatine sulfate. I mean, there's a lot of great ingredients. I'm also a big fan of red light therapy. You can overdo it, but that helps improve nitric oxide. And it's also great for SAD because you can just turn the sunshine on with a button, right? And feel that warmth on your face and get the circulation and things. So vitamin D with some of these other nitric oxide considerations can really work a lot better. And definitely take it with K2. Definitely have enough magnesium because that's a cofactor there. And just do it right. This is like 6 months out of the year where we're not going to get a lot of natural production. So you got to compensate somehow.
Yeah. Good. I like that. I like all those extra things to consider with vitamin D. So, Justin, we've talked about the impact of light on the body. We've talked about how that can impact serotonin and how that impacts mood and focus. We've talked about melatonin and cortisol and how that can shift circadian rhythms and kind of the groundedness we might feel throughout the day. Talked about vitamin D and how that's going to be lesser in the winter and have a lot of immune and hormonal impacts. Any other things that you want to think through that people should be mindful of how this can be impact or how, I guess, lack of light can be impacting them? We talked a little bit about appetite, especially around carbohydrate and serotonin. Anything else that we're missing that we should think through? Audience, I'd also offer and encourage you at this point in time, if you have any trouble areas that you think we've missed, please toss them into the chat. I know we have a really robust Q&A. We're going to be getting to there soon, but if you think that there's a section we've missed, please do toss it into the chat.
Yeah, and it's again, it's pure epigenetics that we're talking about. There's actually a couple of interesting studies, that we've looked at that really are relevant for this conversation. So, like, one of them talked about this comprehensive review of research on how light exposure, being artificial light at night and reduced natural daylight, it impacts circadian rhythms, brain function, and mood regulation as well. And what they found is that light strongly influences the body's internal clock, right? The circadian rhythm with those genes and things that we talked about before. Disrupting natural light cycles by less daytime light or more nighttime light can dysregulate your mood, your neurotransmission, and the brain regions that govern emotion and behavior. So it can even make you more irritable. Light really does impact mood indirectly through sleep disruption and hormone changes. And then it does it directly via specialized light sensing retinol cells that project to mood centers in the brain. Right. So I think the main takeaway here is that light isn't just for like vision and, well, now I can see and now I can't. It's actually a regulator of
Mm-hmm.
the brain systems that control mood and daily rhythms, and
Yeah.
changes in light exposure can contribute to mood disturbances, right? So that's that SAD effect that light really directly translates to.
And I would offer it goes beyond that too, right? So audience, I think because light has become really popular in the past years and this idea of sleep as well, we've kind of clued into the fact that sleep is helpful. There are a lot of larger studies, meaning this is studies of hundreds, if not thousands of people, not just a few people, that look at those who have exposed themselves to incredible amounts of light at night. What does this do to their cardiometabolic? So, cardio meaning their heart health, metabolics really meaning their blood sugar and their weight health. And replicated across multiple studies. The numbers might be a little bit different, but replicated across multiple studies. Effectively, the more light exposure you have at night, to a degree even independent of how much sleep you're getting. I'll explain that in a second. But the amount of light that you're getting at night really means you're going to have increased cardiometabolic or heart and weight and blood sugar issues. And what I mean by independent of how much actual sleep, there's nuance to this. And I haven't read the studies recently enough to give you the exact numbers. So, first thing, how much sleep you get absolutely impacts both of those outcomes. Because while you're asleep, that's when your body's kind of going through with a squeegee brush and cleaning everything up. But here's the kind of the interesting thing. When they took groups of people that slept approximately the same amount, so let's say their head hit the pillow at 11 and they woke up at 7. And so they're looking at these people that consistently do that. They're approximately getting that ever desired 8 hours, divided them into groups. One group was more or less in a completely black room, meaning no light. And then the other group was in a room where maybe there was some ambient light, or maybe they had a partner that, came in partway through the light. And so the light, sorry, partway through the night. And so the light was on, those sorts of things. They found that people who had that dark room consistently, that absence of light while they're sleeping, that's the important part, had better health outcomes than the group of people who got the exact same amount of sleep but had some of those variables. Remember that when we're closing our eyes, our skin is still sensing light, our eyes to a degree through that, right? Like close your eyes in a bright room. You know it's still a bright room. You're not mixed up and you can't decide if it's bright or not, right? Your body is still taking in these light cues. And so I think light, when we think about how seasonal affective disorder and how light exposure and how in the winter in particular, you're not feeling great, maybe you're staying up later and watching TV, that's all going to have a lot of impact on heart health, on weight health, and on mood health, as Justin has just gone through.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And, we know that light really does directly impact cortisol levels and things like that. And it's like when it comes to the blood sugar equation, just understand that cortisol is a relatively sizable factor, right? Like a cortisol dysregulation problem is a big contributor to a blood sugar dysregulation problem because that's what it does. It's part of the mechanism. Like when you get a cortisol spike, like when you have a whole bunch of blue light, it causes the liver to give you that glucose because it's a survival thing. You need that instant energy so that you can run away from the predator or the fire or whatever's going on. But we've got these devices in front of us all the time that are giving us LED blue light. So that is a huge factor when it comes to blood sugar regulation because it's causing this stress hormone release. I hope you all have blue light filters installed on your devices. And as nerdy as the glasses are, like put them on. You know what I mean? For me, as soon as it's the evening time, I put the glasses on. And then I use the bio lights that I mentioned as well to make sure that I've got as many proper signals as possible. And then once it's bedtime, just dark as dark can be, the darker you can possibly get it. If you have that dysregulation in serotonin, by the way, it makes it so that your brain is really receptive to the light. Like it's almost looking for reasons to wake you up in the middle of the night because that's part of how serotonin works. Our ancestors, somebody had to get up in the middle of the night to check for rustling in the bushes or smoke or, whatever that was. So nowadays, that survival mechanism is just here as a disruptor of our sleep, right? If you have the LS or the SS or you don't have good TPH2, that serotonin dysregulation makes your brain want to find reasons to get you up and check, right? So just know that sleep architecture and sleep hygiene is more important for you than anybody else if you have these genes that are not working in your favor. You're muted there, Dr. K.
I feel like this has been the story of my life where I'm saying something, but I'm on mute. All right. I guess, Justin, before we move on to questions and answers, um, any little Justin pearls that you want to offer the audience?
Sure. So there's a few things to bear in mind here in the winter as well. Number one, we're way more inclined to be inside. That has other issues. Everybody's heard me talk about grounding and negative ions and things like that. So having some level of like exposure to the outdoors, unless it's god awful, like minus who knows what, if you have the ability to still go outside and go for a walk in the park, even though you're not grounding, you're still surrounded by negative ions. If you can take that little bit of time and turn off your device and just go outside, you're still going to have a lot of these natural frequencies, and that will help to regulate your physiology. Another piece of advice is if you have some time to open your windows, right? Because the air quality inside will get worse and worse if your whole family is inside breathing and you got pets and different things going on. So find some time if it does warm up, open your windows and get some air flowing through there. I'm also a big fan of movement snacks, like I talk about these micro workouts, right? Because you may not want to go and scrape your windshield and go to the gym when it's dark and fight traffic and the snowplow hasn't come and the streets are a mess. If you can get cumulative time under tension, it does the same thing as if you did it all in one session. So a lot of people want to do a 90-minute workout in the depths of the winter. That's a lot harder to pull off. But these movement snacks, right? These micro workouts, 10 body weight squats here and a set of push-ups there. Cumulatively, that gives your muscles the same stress as it would if you just buckled down for 90 minutes straight. So movement snacks are fantastic for dopamine and endorphins and different things that you can get there as well. One more piece of advice is I think oxytocin is underrated. And if you have seasonal affective disorder and you're not hugging your dog or your cat, your family members, I think that
Mm,
you're amiss there because oxytocin can really help to compensate for some of these other issues. So
mhm.
your family should give you warmth and you can give it back to them. Your pets can give
I
you
love
warmth,
it.
you can give it back to them. And just
Mm.
because the elements are not giving you warmth, it doesn't mean that you can't give it to others and receive it from others as well. Oxytocin is beautiful. It makes you feel good. And I honestly think that it's an underrated thing because we're all so digital and separate from one another. So a little bit of connection in these contractions
Mhm.
goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a little bit of a tease. I think it's next week at some point in time. We're going to be doing a webinar on new genes that includes genes associated to oxytocin. So, a very good natural plug that I wasn't aware of. So, thank
I
you.
didn't even think of that. It just was a good piece of advice at the time. But yeah, show up for that one, folks. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Okay, let's move into questions. So, Justin, I'm going to give you the first one because I'll take the second one. Kareen, I think if I really need new glasses, I say this every webinar, and one day it's going to happen. I think it's Kareen. Any suggestions for rotating shift work and sleep? Um, they work 7 days on, 7 days off. The days off, they sleep during the night, but the days on, they're going to have to work during the night. Winter is obviously harder to do this.
Yeah, so one of the main things that I would consider there is doing like a 4-time cortisol reading that you can do just to see how badly this may be impacting you, right? So if you really get a gauge on HPA axis dysregulation by doing like a 4 time a day cortisol, that'll show you is this messing up your hormones or not. You can also do like cortisol to DHEA ratio and see if this is putting your body really into a catabolic state. So there is some lab work that you can do that can be of value there. But what I mentioned before about these biohacked naps, that's one of the main pieces of advice that I use because the problem is that, again, your body's not detoxifying if you're not getting a lot of melatonin production. If you happen to be producing excess cortisol because of the fact that you have to swap your circadian rhythm every week, I mean, that's quite often you're having to do that. I would say that that's going to impair things like detox. That can impair things like gut health. So using sauna, right, using high quality detoxification strategies can go a long way. The biohack nap thing that I talk about is you can do different protocols, but for me, it looks like either elevating my feet and doing like a new calm or a brain tap session, or I do it on that PEMF mat, which I'm a huge fan of, especially in the winter, because it gives you negative ions. It gives you PEMF, which works on the Earth's kind of magnetism, and then it heats up via infrared as well. So it gives you a cozy, warm place to take a nap, and it really helps to pull inflammation out of the body. And you can use different settings, for example, theta, right? So the theta brainwave kind of hovers you just above sleep, and it gives you a lot of that detoxification and that restoration associated with a power nap. So I do the mat, I do the Apollo, I do the brain tap. I just force it. I create a session 20 to 40 minutes where my body just thinks that we're napping. And for a shift worker, I would say that protocol is worth its weight in gold. So that's a few pieces of advice.
I like that. That's some very it's difficult to give advice to shift workers because we have so much data that says, this isn't great, but I like that very tangible leverage the very technology that might be taking away your sleep can also be the technology that supports you.
Yeah.
I like that. Yep. All right, so Ellen has our next question, and they're saying they have a friend who loves shorter days and longer nights, in that, they don't necessarily experience the seasonal kind of blues. Instead, they're really relishing in it. How is this explained genetically? I would offer there's not necessarily a genetic underpinning to that. There's probably some elements within their mood and behavior profile, but I also want to take a step back and speak to how at odds sometimes winter can be with modern life. So, within modern life, and I'm really speaking especially to urban cities and people who have 9 to 5 jobs, we have this idea that you should be performing 9 to 5 around the year, as if summer days are the exact same as winter days. And so sometimes in the winter, the challenge actually is you're expected to perform as if it's the summer day, and you're expected to perform as if there's light in the summer and consistency in the summer. And when we think back ancestrally to how we've evolved up until maybe, 200 or 300 years ago, there was a lot of allowance for the winter people in general to slow down that is not afforded to people in modern day. So some people I know that enjoy this, it's for one of two reasons. Number one, they have a job that allows a little bit more of that down scheduling and they really relish in that. There's an element of the body shouldn't be on in a high gear mode and a high summer mode all the time. There should be moments truly where you are resting it. Additional to that, some people, especially more introverted people, and this again can be seen in genes, winter is permission in order to say, hey, it's cold, I'm not coming out. And some people, again, really relish in, instead of going out to be with people, they can go to bed early. So sometimes there's an element of permission that comes alongside winter. And if you have that flexibility in your life and you have that flexibility in your social circles, and it's not impacting your mood, meaning you're choosing to stay in to rest as opposed to choosing to stay in to avoid because things aren't feeling great, I'd really encourage you do take that because the body isn't designed to be in high gear all the time, in spite of kind of the idea of the 9 to 5 always on that we've decided the world needs to be. I think, especially females with periods, women with periods can also attest to that, right? We don't perform at peak service, right? All days of the month. Instead, there's cycles. The first half, you're probably outperforming men in terms of energy. The second half, you're underperforming in terms of energy because there's more of that push towards rest. So grow mindful of what your body's natural cycling is relative to the sun, relative to your hormones, and then honor that a little bit because there's a lot of effort that goes into fighting against that. Yeah. All right. Justin, next question from Angelil, if I can see that correctly. They're asking, can you talk a little bit about horizon gazing, namely the best time for it in the evening?
Yeah, for sure. So the main thing is it's not just the light stimulus, like I mentioned, it's the angle, right? So it's called a low solar angle. It's going to come up on one side, it's going to go all the way up high, and noon it's going to be above you, and then it's going to go to the other side, and it's going to be basically right there at the horizon again. So you don't want to do it prior to it coming up, and you don't want to do it after it going down because you want your eyes to be sort of in alignment with it, and they'll see and recognize the low solar angle. They see the angle and then it also sees the light spectrum. And that is what tells you what time of day it is. So I try to say sunrise when it starts to come up, even if it's covered by clouds, just go out there and
Mhm.
obviously don't look right at the sun, but towards it, right?
Mhm.
And your brain is going to say it's at a low angle and it's mostly blue and yellow. So that means this must be daytime. Bing, cortisol, it's going to kick off that whole rhythm. 12 hours or so later, you're going to be looking at it again at a low solar angle. Now it's red, yellow. And so your brain recognizes where it is and what the color is. And if you can do that twice a day, I'm talking 5 minutes, right? Twice a day doing that horizon gazing, it's going to help auto regulate that whole circadian rhythm. And I love it. It's low tech, it's not biohacky, it's not going to cost you anything. And just go out there and check out where the sun's at. And it can help to kind of signal the brain. That's great epigenetics because it's just pure environmental input of information. So I like that strategy a lot.
Yeah, love it. For Justin, for Joanna and Susan, I think, can you speak to the brand of the light bulbs that you're using? And
Yeah.
I guess just quickly go back to what exactly those are for those that missed that part.
Yeah, and so I got these specifically because of my genes and the issues that I've had with kind of adapting to circadian rhythm protocols. Again, we all do the 9 to 5 thing, and you have to find different ways that you can kind of cut out the consequence to your body, right? From having to do work that might be earlier than your body wants in the winter time. So I found different ways to do that. And these particular lights, the company is called Block Blue Light. We're not affiliated with them or anything, but they are fantastic. And it's basically called the Bio Light. So again, it's not a gadget; it's just actual light bulbs that you would screw into whatever. I have them in our lamps. I have them in my office. This is actually the afternoon setting right here that you're seeing, so you can see that it's not super bright. And then you have the three different settings. So it's got one that's a lot brighter for the morning. And then the midday would be this one. And the night one has a lot more red infused into it. And I mean, it's a great thing. You can have it in your fridge. You can have it, in the bathroom, anywhere that you're going to be seeing, in the PM and the AM. It really helps to establish this cortisol and melatonin kind of thing. So yeah, block blue light, BioLight is what it's called. They're
Mhm.
incandescent. There's another question about LEDs here. I might as well just tackle that a tad.
Please. Yeah.
Um, LEDs, the benefit of them is they're very energy efficient and they're very bright, right? Like they work and they're cost efficient as well. So LEDs have their place and their purpose. One of the problems with them is that they do give off a bit of EMF, a bit of that dirty electricity that we don't necessarily want. And there's also this imperceptible flicker that happens kind of, you can't really see it because it's going really, really fast, but it can cause issues with your eyes, like retinal damage and things like that, because we're looking right at it and it has that flicker going on. Incandescent light bulbs, they don't have nearly the flicker, they don't have nearly the dirty electricity output, and a campfire is far more incandescent. The sunshine is far more incandescent as well. So it's more of a natural spectrum of lighting that doesn't quite tax your eyes on the same level. I find LEDs really don't make me feel good. Like I
Mm.
find like my head hurts when I have to see a lot of them. So the more incandescent you can do, the better, because it mimics like a campfire spectrum, something that our ancestors undoubtedly would have seen. So yeah, that particular, it doesn't have to be that brand. That's just the one that I found, and I've been obsessed with them ever since. I've got them
Hmm.
all over my house now, and they're fantastic.
Hmm. All right. The next question we have from Jayashari, if I'm saying that correctly, is asking, is there an adverse effect to working out in the late afternoon? Um, I would offer if you're working out, that's spectacular in general. And I would say there's also going to be an element of personalization there in that some people are going to have issue with that and other people won't. But outside of kind of, is that the only time you can? And then it's probably the best time. And separate to that, your own trial and error. Justin, any thoughts?
Yeah, there's a few things to consider there. To Dr. K's point, and I'm so glad you said that the way you did. If the alternative is not working out, oh, do it in the afternoon. Absolutely do it in the afternoon. Working out is always going to be better than not working out. What I would say is that some of the problems that can arise is that we do want to honor the cortisol rhythm and remember that a workout is certainly a hormetic stress, right? This concept of hormesis, we've got different types of stress. Working out is absolutely stressful for your body, especially if you push yourself pretty hard. So what we want is the cortisol to rise in the morning and then be dipping, 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 reaching its lowest point about 12 hours later. That gives rise to the melatonin. And for some people, if you do a hard workout in the afternoon, the cortisol should be on its way down and you've spiked it back up. We see that with afternoon caffeine usage and stuff like that as well. So what I would say is that it's not necessarily the
Mm.
ideal time, but it's way better than the alternative being not working out. And I would favor that over like a hard cortisol boosting PM workout. It's still early enough in the day that it's absolutely acceptable to have some cortisol still present at that time. If you have real sleeping issues, though, what I would say is that you may want to try dabbling and pulling it back further a little bit, because then we're really doubling up and we're getting the cortisol when we're supposed to have it and allowing it to naturally drop to where come evening time, it's all about unplugging, relaxing, getting parasympathetic. This whole thing is a nervous system consideration, right? We want to be
Mm.
sympathetic at a time. We want to be parasympathetic at a time. And working out is epigenetics, right? That's information. We're telling our body right now we do this, right now we do this. your hormones can adjust to it, but some people find that the later that they work out, they end up craving carbohydrates deep into the night, and different things can happen there. If it's
Mm-hmm.
not a problem, then don't make it a problem. Work out. I love working out. You should be working out. It's fantastic. But just try to honor your
Yeah.
rhythms with all of your input, because that's what's going to really govern this whole thing and make it so that your hormones are really as on point as we can make them with regard to anabolism and catabolism in the body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Next question is coming from John, and I'll take it. What about using a 10,000 K lux light panel? So, what John is talking about is there's specific lights that emit a very high frequency and intense frequency of light, and these have been studied as medical devices. I'm going to be very specific. They've been studied as medical devices for people who struggle with seasonal affective disorder. So, seasonal affective disorder is something you can get diagnosed for. It's something that goes beyond, like a step beyond winter blues. It's something that will truly impact your ability to function. When light is lower, it creates a depression. And so people who have been diagnosed with this, and they're the people, again, you know, I talked about, um, we've studied that in some people, their serotonin receptors, quite literally the way they manage their serotonin will change in the winter. That's this grouping of people. And so one of the clinical interventions here is light exposure. So John is saying, what about that light? And so, if you have been diagnosed, I think it's absolutely a really important and viable thing to be doing. And I think even people who kind of step up and get close to that point of seasonal affective disorder can benefit from them. It's part of what Justin says, you know, in the winter, when he knows there's going to be sunlight that's a few hours away, he's turning on lights, and that can be part of this. The one thing I would say is two things to be mindful of. There's a proximity thing, in that you do have to be close to it and looking not necessarily directly at it, but it needs to be exposed to your eyes. So it has to be something you have to sit down and be exposed to for a while. Additional to that, there can be reports of what happens when you overdo it. So work with a provider to understand what's an appropriate duration for you, because there are a lot of reports of people who use this on their own, use it too much, and it actually can create states of mania. So instead of feeling really tired, you're kind of on that more agitated, hyper side of things. So be very careful, treat it as a medical device, but I think it's a great thing for people who have SAD or who are flirting with it. Just work with a healthcare provider to understand what's best for you. Yeah. All right. Mary maybe is asking, does BADNF factor into SAD? And where do they find the CRY1 gene? So, CRY1 can be found just, and hold me honest, but I believe both within the sleep, it's definitely in sleep, right? We have cry in sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I would look for it, because then you'll see it next to the clock gene as well, and that's that whole report is going through all the sleep related genes for circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
So yeah, it should be in the sleep profile.
Yeah. And in terms of BDNF, so audience, BDNF also is going to be found both in sleep, but more pointedly within mood and behavior. System summary there. It's a gene that dictates or speaks to brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And are you more prone to be creating good amounts or suboptimal amounts? It has not directly been linked to seasonal affective disorder, but I would offer it absolutely plays into the picture. BDNF is influenced by light exposure, and BDNF has a huge influence on mood, circadian rhythm, and a lot of the downstream impacts. So I would offer two thoughts. Thought number one, genes really do speak to, are you happy to be making it? Are you less happy to be making it? So people in particular in that less happy, I think there's a lot of light hygiene things that can be done. And we'll link to previous webinars that we've done on this, because we've spoken a lot to how can you hack your BDNF, because it's one of these beautiful things that most of the hacks are low tech. Their diet, their exercise, their heat exposure. There's a lot that you can do before you have to spend money. The other thing I'd be really mindful of too, even if let's pretend you have good BDNF levels, As we get older, really, I'm talking about once you hit 30, after that point, your BDNF production starts to go down, regardless what your genes say. And so there's also this element, if you are in some of those later decades of your life, you're probably not producing it in the same way. And so also jumping into that webinar where we've talked about it could be really important to you because you want to harbor and start espousing some of those habits that will encourage it. Because I think it's for me, when I work with people with mental health issues and mood issues and focus issues, it's one of the biggest levers in my mind that I can be playing with for them to be feeling better and thinking better. Yeah. All right. Justin, do you want to read the next one? Because it's a lot of text and I can't see that far.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. And by the way, when it comes to BDNF, listen to whatever Dr. K has to say because she's an absolute expert on BDNF. And that webinar that you did solo on that was absolutely epic, Dr. Check
Thank you.
that one out, audience, if you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this one is coming from Margaret. She says she has actually a two-parter here. So, what levels of vitamin D should we be seeking in a blood test result? She says, so much controversy on what level to aim for, and also how much full body red light therapy is ideal on a daily basis, and what time of day is best to use it. I'm going to answer these in reverse order. The red light therapy piece, I would say there isn't necessarily a best time to do it because we're dealing with the red spectrum here, right? So there's no time in which there's a bad time to do red light therapy because it's not like blue light therapy, right? You can do blue light therapy as well. People will use it in their mouths because it actually helps whiten your teeth, or you can use it because the blue light can actually disrupt acne causing bacteria. So people will use masks and stuff that have certain blue spectrums in there that help deal with that. That I would do in the AM. But with the red, you could do it well into the evening. I mean, it really shouldn't be difficult for your body and your rhythms. It can have a slight cellular energizing effect, however, so be aware of that. Some people find themselves a tad energized after red light therapy. But as to the dosage, that is something that you need to be aware of because red light therapy is also something of a hormetic stress. It can be overdone. And when we do too much red light therapy, it can actually start to create free radicals, right? So we want to be aware of that. You want to look at your SOD2 pathway as well. That's in your antioxidation report. If you don't clear free radicals very well, you're going to want to be aware of that particular hormetic stress, and you're not going to want to do an hour of red light therapy each day. However, you may need the mitochondrial support, so doing the appropriate dose of this particular stress can be valuable. For me, it's going to be, 10 to 20 minutes a day per body part, right? So you could do like, 10 or 20 on the front, 10 or 20 on the back, and you'll get a lot of that benefit there. But if you go over that amount, you're going to likely start creating these reactive oxygen species in the body. There's certain things you can do to mitigate that, like if you use a moisturizer that has EGCG in there, for example, like green tea extract, that can help prevent some of these free radicals from accumulating when you have light therapy going on. So there's ways that you can mitigate it, or our other antioxidant and detox strategies. But the minimal effective dose, just like exercise, just like fasting, just like cold exposure, these are hormetic stresses. The appropriate amount will give you good adaptation. Too much is too much. Red light therapy is like that. So, yeah, 20 minutes on the front, maybe another 20 on the back maximum. I wouldn't go too far beyond that. With the vitamin D dosing, the reason why the reason why there's so much controversy is because different labs do it differently. There's different ways that you can do it. And so I'm only really able to provide kind of a general guideline here because I don't know your whole backstory and where you live and different things. But in general, I mean, the toxicity limit would exist above like 150 nanograms per milliliter. Most people will aim for like, 40, 60. Once you get closer to 100, that's pushing it a little bit. So just be aware of the toxicity limit. Dr. K, do you have any better numbers for that, being an actual doctor, which I am not?
Yeah, I think on Canadian tests, I like to see people sitting, and so this is metric testing. So if you live outside of the US, I'm going to speak to the US in a second. If you live outside of the US, unless you have a medical condition and you want to be talking to your doctor, usually between 100 and 120 tends to be the sweet spot, and we see that as sufficient to prevent cancer, to support immune hormone, to support all those sorts of functions without overdoing it and getting into some of the cardiac issues. From an American perspective, I believe that range sits between it can go as low as 50, 55 and as high as about 80. So you still want to be talking to your doctor because there's a lot of personalizing factors in there. But those tend to be the general ranges that I like to be sticking people within. And what Justin talked about in terms of the big ranges. So, for example, in Canadian tests, you can go as low as 30. And I've just said, the ideal range is going to sit closer to 100. And that huge range is because we can sustain health off of very little, but that doesn't mean we're sustaining good health. So work with your provider, get the tests. I think it's really important because there's such a big window, and ask questions as to, am I just at the bare minimum of, before I get cut off, or am I at truly a healthy space? I think that becomes a really important question anytime you're working through labs with a provider. Sweets. All right. Justin, do you want to talk about where you get your grounding sheets from and if there's anyone you can recommend for that?
Yeah. So Ruben's basically asking about reputable companies for these grounding sheets. I have a couple of opinions on them. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of sleeping grounded. Um, I think it's a great idea on paper. The problem is that when we use these grounding sheets and we're in a home, if we have, a lot of EMF and dirty electricity, or if you're in an apartment building or something like that, we're getting the grounding effect by plugging it into a grounded wire, right? Because electricity in the home has to be grounded. So there's a ground plug. And the problem is that our bodies are highly conductive. And if we lie on a grounding sheet and we sleep that way, one thing that could potentially happen is we may become the conduit for some of the electricity surrounding us. And we have so much around us all the time that I don't necessarily recommend grounding blankets and sheets unless you've got other stuff in place to mitigate the Wi-Fi in the environment. So a grounding sheet plus some quantum fields, like I use the Lila Quantum. I have the necklace. I also have their block, and it creates this quantum field using Aries tech and different things to kind of mitigate the Wi-Fi in the environment. Then sleeping grounded, I think it can negate some of those issues. With regard to companies, there's most of what I learned about grounding came from a gentleman named Clint Ober, I believe is his name. And he wrote a book called Earthing, and it was really fascinating. He talked a lot about Native American tribes and how they tell you to, they're like, your shoes are going to make you sick. Like, take the shoes off because they're disconnecting you from the earth. It's going to make you inflamed. So he had all these fascinating stories about how grounding was actually what ultimately really boosted his health up. And his company, I believe, is called Earth FX. So I just based on the amount that I learned off of him, I would say that's likely a reputable company that did it right. But just bear in mind all the other things that I said about grounding there. The reason I like my PEMF mat is because it's not using the ground wire to create the negative ions that you want. It's actually using different amethyst crystals and stuff like that. So it's a bit of a different effect. It's kind of making its own negative ions instead of relying on the actual grounding effect. So that's great. But if you're going to go for a company, check out the Earth FX because Clint Ober is absolutely an expert on grounding.
Um, Justin, when you ground outside, does pavement play a role in it?
Pavement is effectively rocks. I would say that you're still going to get a lot of the effect from grounding on pavement. I don't think it's quite as pronounced though, because like part of what gives you the negative ions is when lightning strikes the earth in different ways and it charges the actual earth's surface. So soil, right? I mean, grass and soil is likely going to be a little bit better, but rocks are rocks, right? Rocks are conductive, so I think you're still going to get
Mm.
some of the effect as long as there isn't a whole lot of other additives and stuff in the concrete. Like when you start adding blacktop and different things on top of that, every layer between us and the real Earth is going to separate us a little bit from those benefits. So try to do it on the lawn. If not, pavement, I would say would be another alternative. You can also just go and touch trees. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but you don't have to ground with your feet. You could ground with your hands. So if you're out in the woods and you just touch foliage, I mean, you're still going to get that connection and it's still going to have the same negative ion effect.
Mm. Thank you.
You want me
Um,
to read this one, Dr. King?
Yeah, well, I was just going to offer. So Susan has asked quite a detailed question, and unfortunately, Susan, it's not something we can address on air. And part of the reason is we wouldn't be able to give you a really good answer, and that's because you've offered us a lot of detail, and a clinician would need to go back and ask a lot of very specific questions to truly get to the root cause. So, Susan, you've brought up sleeping issues, but you've mentioned several different things that play into sleep, and it's not possible for us to know truly what is root cause or how many of those sit at root cause. So, what I would encourage, we're going to toss into the chat an email that you can reach out to if you want to set up some time with us. And during that time, we can have a provider that will be able to access all of your DNA and then support you with better questions and then a plan as to how you can go about addressing that. Because I think you have a few variables there that are low hanging fruit, in that I think because there's a lot of little things that aren't working out so well, when you kind of address them in small ways, you're going to get the benefit that you want. So we're not avoiding the question. We just want to offer you best information. And we can't do that unless we were to pull you onto the air and in front of all these people ask for all of your medical history. So Susan or anyone else that does have questions specific to our providers, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're going to put an email into the chat that you can reach out, and we'll connect you with a really good provider. That could be Justin. Or, Susan, I'd say you probably want to be working with Dr. Steady. So if you want to include that in your note, Dr. Steady can be a really good resource for what you've mentioned to us there. Okay. All right. Uh, Justin, Echo, I think, has our next question if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so Echo is asking, are there concerns about fluorescent lights as well? She says that her eyes never feel good working under fluorescent lights long term. Yeah, I am the exact same way with that. I would put fluorescent lighting in the same category as LED lighting. It's still got that
Mm,
flicker that you can't quite see, and it can still cause the melatonin disruption, the cortisol, all of these things. Most people who work in offices, I mean, yeah, that fluorescent lighting starts to mess
mm,
with you. It messes with your eyes, your
mm,
energy. So hopefully we get to a place where these offices will actually start to incorporate biolights and things like that.
mm,
Because yeah, fluorescents are absolutely in the same category. They make my head hurt, no doubt about it.
mm. All right. Um, Jayashri is asking the question, what about walking in the evening after dinner? And so I think this is really getting back to the idea of horizon gazing.
Yeah, horizon gazing and BDNF, right? I mean that
Hmm.
particular strategy covers a lot of bases in one. First of all, you're doing postprandial exercise, right? So after you eat, you're moving your body around. That's fantastic for blood sugar regulation and things. So I love it for that reason alone. But then walking in the evening is again, it's a parasympathetic thing, right? You're not sprinting and trying to up your cortisol. You're just moving. It's higher volume, but it's lower intensity. So you are giving your body that cardiovascular stimulus without upping your cortisol. And then the light stimulus is the absolutely natural spectrum. So you're horizon gazing, you're dealing with blood sugar, you're transitioning your body into the evening, and you're also amplifying BDNF because exercise and movement will also increase BDNF. So you're doing some good for your brain, the neuroplasticity. That's a fantastic strategy. I highly recommend it. Keep it up.
Yeah, yeah. Next question for you, Justin, is going to be around brain tap. Do you want to speak to what is the brain tapping that you are using?
Yeah, so people talk about tapping because that's kind of part of the EMT technique. There's different things that people can get from this tapping. What I'm talking about is actually a device. It's literally called Brain Tap. Dr. Varden and myself, we interviewed the guy who created it, Dr. Patrick Porter, brilliant guy, and it's a device that has multiple modalities in one. So it uses photobiomodulation that goes into the eyes as well as the ears, and the left eye charges the right brain and vice versa. So it's got light stimulus. It's also got binaural beats that are really advanced because your brain can't quite figure out the pattern. As soon as it does, it changes. So it really helps pulling your brain into different states and it increases neuroplasticity. some of the studies they did with this brain tap, they were done on nurses, who obviously have different, a lot of stress and sleep issues and stuff. And they were able to increase neuroplasticity in a bunch of these women by up to 70% by using this brain tap device. So it's also got meditation tracks that play behind all of that as well. So the technology kind of pulls your brain into a receptive state. And then there's a voice overlay that goes on. And there's hundreds of tracks that you can choose from where it basically mimics a state of meditation. And you can just brainwash yourself with positive messages as well. So I love the brain tap. I do it 1 to 3 times a day. Check out the webinar that we did with Dr. Porter, where we went pretty deep into how it works and the science behind it.
Mhm. Thanks. All right. Susan messaged me and offered a bit of a clarifying follow-up. And so I think there's something interesting that came up that I want to share with the audience. And it's not actually specific to Susan's question in terms of her health history. But what the question circled around is during the winter, is melatonin a helpful intervention, especially if you're struggling to adjust to some of the things and you're struggling to manage your sleep schedule? From a study perspective, so when we look at literature and research that said, is melatonin helpful in terms of getting to sleep, staying asleep? And unless you're experiencing jet lag, for most people, melatonin is not helpful. And so it's not something that, from an insomnia perspective, can help unless you've truly changed time zones. There's change in light exposure and a few other things. Usually, a lot of the intervention has to sit outside of melatonin, namely in a lot of the lifestyle things that we've talked about. Unless there's a few instances there, sometimes in geriatric populations, sometimes in people who have true melatonin deficiencies, and sometimes in people with cortisol. So, those are all instances you might want to talk to your doctor. But by and large, kind of population level, melatonin is not helpful for sleep unless you have jet lag. So, if you're struggling with it, if you're asking the question of, will melatonin help me transition into better sleep schedules, I would encourage the answer is by and large no. And there's probably a different root cause, and to work on lifestyle and chat with the provider as to truly what is causing that hiccup for you. Yeah. All right. Justin, I see enough in the next question from Joanna to see your name mentioned. Do you want to talk to it?
Sure. So she's basically saying, following up on what I was talking about with regard to red light therapy, and I was talking about the free radical buildup, and that's what she's referencing. She says, how about following it up with a sauna session to mitigate the free radicals? I think that can be a valuable thing to do because you're getting that phase 3 detoxification, right? So sweating is direct detoxification. It can help to mitigate the free radical factor. What I would say is that you are also, though, doubling up on hormetic stresses, right? Because now we've got the light stimulus, that's a hormetic stress. And then we've also got the heat stimulus, which is another hormetic stress. So just be mindful of how you feel. If you find that you're really low energy after you get out, that means that you maybe pushed it a bit too far and you may have overstressed the body. Cortisol went up and it went back down, and blood sugar can drop thereafter. Same thing with cold exposure. Too long in that cold tub, you're going to feel really good for a bit, but too long, you're going to actually cause a dip because your blood sugar is going to go up and it's going to come back down. And a lot of people come out of these cold tubs and they're yawning and they're all tired. And it's like, wasn't that supposed to energize you? But you weren't supposed to do it for 20 minutes. You're supposed to do it for 90 seconds, right? I combine it. So I have a red light that's actually built special for my sauna because the heat can make the bulbs explode if you're not careful. But you can double up. So my sauna has a full red light unit in there, and I'm kind of getting them both done at the same time. But to directly answer your question, yeah, I think that if you have enough strategies in place to mitigate reactive oxygen species, you can hit the light and then hit the sauna. Just pay attention to how you feel and make sure you didn't push it too far. Hydrate properly, get the minerals, do all those things as well, and you'll be just fine doing that.
All right. I'll close out the last question there from Echo. Echo's asking if vitamin D blood levels, how does that interact with the vitamin D receptor? So we have a gene, it's called VDR, and it really looks into when vitamin D is present and connecting with a receptor, what is the signaling strength? Meaning, are you offering a strong signal or a little bit of a weaker signal? In people with suboptimal presentations, when that vitamin D connects to that receptor, that signal is a bit weaker. And so, depending on where that signal is, sometimes that's for cellular differentiation, which is a huge impact in growth, a huge impact in um, cellular turnover, especially cardiac tissues, as well as cancer prevention. Sometimes that is more at a hormone level, so curating your immune system and different hormones within it, right? There's many things that vitamin D will impact. So for those that have that weaker receptor, some of that signaling isn't as strong. The benefit of vitamin D isn't as strong for them. Um, in terms of research, there's not much you can do in order to change this receptor activation. You're kind of stuck with what you have. There's some small end studies that look at, does exercise help increase the signal? And the answer might be yes. So while I don't say we have a lot of science, I say exercise is absolutely, if you have poor vitamin D receptors, it might be helpful. So you might as well play with it because it's good for so many other things. So, in terms of people with poor vitamin D receptors, the encouragement is always having sufficient vitamin D levels in the blood because we know you're battling against a weaker signal. So, we want to make sure there's always something connecting to that because we don't ever want to be an instance where you don't have enough to connect. And when you do have that connection, it's a weak signal. Control what you can control and let go of the rest. So if you have a weak signal there, be very mindful, A, to get your exercise in. And separate to that, make sure you all the more need to ensure you have well regulated blood vitamin D levels. D'accord. I think that is it pour ce soir. Oui, anything else? Justin, anything else that we should be thinking through before we bid our audience adieu?
No, I'm glad that you guys showed up for this. And just remember that if you are in a contraction phase, that the expansion phase is imminent, right? They only exist because of each other. So if you're in one of those phases, the next one is right on its way. And I talk about this idea of like winning seasons and losing seasons. A contraction phase is like a losing season, right? The trees lose their leaves,
Yeah.
etc. The key is to win in your losing season, right? To make the right decisions in your losing season so it doesn't compound the problem.
Mhm.
We can all sit here and say, well, it's winter time, so that means that I might as well eat the snacks and not exercise and, think negative thoughts and just kind of close up on myself. No, win in your losing season, right? And
Mhm.
that's what we're here to do. So do all the right stuff, get the right epigenetic signals. You're going to make it through. Spring is on its way. So we can all look forward to that.
Mhm. Yeah. All right, which triggers into my advice. And Justin, this is my favorite part because I didn't know you didn't enjoy this, but I'm grateful that you come along for the ride. Audience, it's the end of our webinar. And if you're ever on a webinar with me, you know what time of day it is. It means it's dancing time. So, science asks the question. We know that exercise is so very important to mental health and cognitive health. So, we're thinking as well as heart. Um, and it asks the question of what type of exercise is best because we know it's all really good. And the answer was dancing. This is my big fish story. The impact of dancing becomes bigger every webinar we do. So, audience, as we sign off, we are all going to dance. I hear from some of you that you dance alongside us. So, please, if you dance with us or you're thinking about it, I encourage you to do it now. Vanny, do you want to cue the music? We are going to dance out. Thank you so very much, audience.